Good morning, everybody. Very good morning from a very cloudy Slough, but I'm sure the sun will come out later on. Welcome. Lovely to see you all. Thank you for joining us this morning. This is the second in the Chambers webinar series for the CityFibre Digital Academy, which we kicked off with CityFibre back in January. And I'm really delighted that we're hosting Mike Robinson, Head of Security for CyberCrowd. We were just chatting away about, before we started, about Slough and the trading estate and how things are all moving along. But today we're going to be talking about real world cyber threats, case studies and lessons learned. So we're really pleased to have Mike having that with us today. The Q&A will be open. So any questions throughout, please pop them in the chat or the QEA. And if there's time at the end and the questions haven't been answered during Mike's presentation, we can take it from there. But without any further ado, Mike, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for having me. Lovely to be on here today, and hopefully this will be an interesting session. The brief that I was given was to talk to you about cybersecurity, specifically some of the incidents that I've worked on in the past, some of the tactics that the bad guys use, some of the techniques that they use. I've added in a couple of case studies. Happy to answer questions on them. I've obviously not included the names of those customers and how they operate. So I've tried to keep that as secret as possible with the greatest respect to that organization. So sometimes we find with a cyber incident is actually the start of a really serious cyber transformation. So some organizations almost need to have an incident in order to make those investment and that judgment. One of the big things for me with responding to incidents isn't necessarily just a technical aspect. That's fairly straightforward. We have playbooks, we have ways of responding to an incident, and we check those boxes off as we work through it. But the biggest thing for me is the impact on humans, the mental health aspects, the individuals that feel like they're to blame, the challenges around working really hard for a long period of time, and that general fatigue. So I just want to cover that in terms of the real impact of a cyber incident. And then I've just got a final slide on the common themes that I see. I've probably been involved with maybe, I don't know, it's over 100 cyber incidents over the course of the last 6-7 years. And there are definitely some common themes that I see. And I could talk about this all day long in terms of some of the very basic protection methodologies that we should be using. So I'll cover some of those, and then just some of the gotchas, I guess, in terms of what they are and how to combat them. So I think the questions are open, so feel free to ask, and I'll get to those at the end. So firstly, this is kind of how I normally am greeted when it comes to cybersecurity and having a conversation about it. The world has changed slightly. I'm definitely being asked to talk more about my experiences and specifically how to prevent cyber incidents and responding to cyber incidents. But typically, this is a topic that people would kind of steer away from. It's perhaps a bit of dark arts and dark magic. So I want to try and simplify that. I want to try and present this in a jargon-free way. So if there is anything that I've said today that is not understood, please call that out, because I should be able to present this in normal language and business language. So please don't be frightened to do that. But by way of introduction, I've worked in cybersecurity probably for about 15 years now. I'm a national cybersecurity incident responder, which effectively means that I've worked to the NCSC's standards when it comes to responding to incidents. In the UK, the National Cybersecurity Centre are our technical subject matter experts. So they protect critical national infrastructure. They protect the public sector, schools, hospitals, councils, those types of organizations. And they build that knowledge base in terms of how to protect against the threats that we're seeing. I've been involved with major cyber incidents, and both good and bad experiences. It's really strange to say it, but a cyber incident, if you're well practiced in it, you can have a really good experience because it should be a straightforward process that you follow. But there are obviously bad experiences where organizations aren't prepared. They don't have the appropriate level of resilience or backup to recover from that incident. That's particularly challenging because there isn't an easy way to recover if you haven't got the appropriate controls in place. So that can be quite challenging. And I've also been involved with situations where organizations, and I don't think unreasonably, are keen to keep the noise of what's happened out of the news, out of the press. So whilst we're seeing a lot of highly publicized attacks at the moment, we're also seeing probably that, that in fact is the case where that's the tip of the iceberg. We're seeing far more below them that are also being attacked and ransomware is being deployed. So we often find ourselves in situations where the organization we're working for wants to make sure that no one is aware of what's going on. If it's a public sector organization, that's actually very difficult to do because we have to report that and it has to be fed up through the appropriate mechanisms. We've got the Information Commissioner's Office, for example, to report those types of breaches. So it's an interesting sort of conundrum that we find ourselves in, working for and behalf of the organizations. I'm going to start with the importance of cybersecurity, and this has definitely been a journey. If I look back 4 or 5 years, it's really difficult to have a conversation with someone about cybersecurity. It just wasn't on their radar. It's just something that they felt was perhaps an IT problem. The IT guys will sort that out. They're responsible for our security. What we're able to message now more and more is that actually security isn't an IT problem, it's a resilience problem. We're talking about how we train our staff, how we understand what the latest threats are, how we work with our supply chain. So it's not just about IT, it's the operational aspects as well. And we're seeing more and more attacks in the UK, more and more successful attacks in the UK, and that's both public sector and private sector. And those distinctions are quite important because you would expect the private sector specifically to have more investment capability. Certainly with regards to HMRC, which was announced last week, you would expect them to be doing everything possible to protect our data and information. So despite that, despite the budgets that are available, despite the National Cybersecurity Centre, these attacks continue to happen, and the growth is almost like a hockey stick at the moment. We're seeing more and more. So, and I don't expect that to change. And what's driving that is that evolving threat technique. The big one at the moment is AI, but if we think about Copilot, for example, the vision of Microsoft with Copilot is to open up an enterprise or an organization's data and allow AI agents to go and utilize that data and provide responses. That's really scary from a security perspective because it suddenly means that all of the data in your organization is open unless you put the appropriate controls in place. So how we deal with AI and how we enable it to access and interrogate and derive information from our data is a really important one. And those that are at the cutting edge of that are leaving doors open and perhaps not hardening that as well as they should. So AI is a real big concern for us at the moment. So social engineering is huge. So when we talk social engineering, we're talking phishing, we're talking phishing, someone phoning up, voice phishing effectively. We're talking open source information gathering, checking LinkedIn, checking Facebook, trying to work out a profile of an individual. Most events that I work with start from some form of social engineering, particularly phishing emails. There's been a real growth of phishing emails. In the past, it would be quite easy, in my opinion, to spot a phishing email. These days, because we've got generative AI, a phishing email is actually reasonably well crafted. It doesn't have the grammatical issues or the spelling mistakes that we used to see. If you talk to the National Cyber Security Centre, one of their big concerns at the moment is the supply chain. So we are an enterprise organization, but we have lots of organizations that supply to us. How do we know that those organizations are safe? How do we know that their security protocols are appropriate for their size and risk? How do we know that they're not going to be used to launch an attack on us? So supply chain is a really big concern across public and private sector. And if you look at some of the council and NHS style attacks, they're quite often supply chain led. So that's a big one for us. Ransomware is when files are encrypted. So effectively, someone is able to get to your files, encrypt them, and in return for payment, they will decrypt them. So really bad situation. We're seeing the rise of ransomware as a service. So historically, you would have reasonably sophisticated, smart individuals building ransomware, creating ransomware, and finding opportunities for it. Now we're seeing them provide that service to young up and coming, we call them script kiddies, but individuals that will go out and find those opportunities on behalf of the more sophisticated bad actor. So ransomware as a service is, if we look at the recent retail attacks, they're reasonably confident that they're ransomware as a service. So quite an interesting way of doing things. If you couple that with current affairs, we've got quite a lot going on in the world at the moment. We've got war zones, we've got conflict with different countries, we've got new regulations, new compliance in the UK or Europe. We've got NIS2, we've got DORA, which deals with resiliency for financial organizations. We've got different organizations creating AI models. So there's lots going on. There's a real it feels like a real period of growth or advancement for the human race. And with all of that going on, we are concerned with how do we protect ourselves and how do we protect the organizations that we work with. And it's just getting more complex. It's getting more difficult, big organizations, multiple systems, legacy systems, AI trying to interrogate that data. We're trying to present data through websites, through mobile phones, through fridges and toasters and all sorts of things now. So the complexity of our landscape is changing, and it's changing at a pace that we've never seen before. So that's both an exciting time to be around, but also quite a scary time. So if I put all of that together into a big pot, that's quite a lot of concern about why we should be worried about our cyber hygiene in our organizations. And when I talk organizations, I also talk individually. A lot of the advice that I'll talk about today are very much aligned to how we should protect ourselves outside of work as well. So if we think about the threat landscape, these are the types of organizations or people that we're likely to come up against in terms of when we're trying to defend ourselves. Hacktivists are, I work with an airport. If they announce a new runway, hacktivists are people that will try to stop that runway. They'll try and cause disruption. They'll try and bring systems down. They'll run attacks like denial of service, or they'll create websites that are spoofs of your website. So they're normally politically motivated, less motivated about money, which is clearly the main motivation of a hacker or a criminal. These tend to be groups, reasonably sophisticated. They used to be separate. It would be a hacker group, a criminal group. Very much now, these are the same people. The criminal way of making money historically has moved online. It's credit card fraud, it's money laundering, it's those sorts of things. And the hackers are really good at that sort of stuff. So those worlds collide. They're very well organized. There's hundreds of them across the world, and lots of cyber businesses will monitor their activity. They'll monitor their modus operandi in terms of how they work, and we'll use that intelligence to determine our response if ever we get attacked by those hackers or criminal groups. We see competitors involved with cyber incidents. Really interesting, where maybe people will try and put a plant in that organization. Maybe they're trying to steal confidential data. Maybe they're looking at a merger and acquisition strategy and trying to derail it. So there's lots of things that happen from a competitor perspective. Most of it isn't just Hollywood, it does happen in real life as well. So that's something to be concerned about. Script kiddies tend to be the sort of less sophisticated individuals. If you think sort of a hacker in their bedroom with their hoodie, that sort of famous view, that tends to be the script kiddie. And if they find something of interest with the tools that they use, they'll more often than not these days elevate or escalate that up to the hacker groups or the criminal groups. So they work in partnership. The collaboration they have is fantastic. The rewards for script kiddies is fantastic, and these groups are run like businesses with commission plans and promotion plans, those sorts of things. So they are very well organized. Insiders are people that work for you. They could be malicious, i.e., I work for an organization and I'm going to steal something, or they could be non-malicious. I made a mistake. I accidentally sent the database to different people that I shouldn't have done. So insiders are growing in threat because the world as it is at the moment, we're seeing a lot of reduction in workforces. As a consequence of that reduction, there are individuals that are not happy, and unhappy individuals tend to be a little bit more malicious. So we're definitely seeing an increase in leavers stealing databases or confidential data on the way out. So that's quite an interesting one over the last 18 months to 2 years. And then the final kind of threat would be state nations. So famously, North Korea are very good at this. You might think about Russia, China, those types of countries. If those types of countries are attacking you, it will be very difficult to protect yourself. So that's where we need to rely on the National Cybersecurity Centre and be aware of the support that's available for us. The types of organizations that historically we've seen them attack will be where there's research and development. So during COVID, universities were targeted because they were leading the development of COVID jabs, that type of activity. So healthcare, pharma, those types of companies are often targeted there. And the tactics that they use, almost every cyber event that I've worked with has started with phishing, so an email, some form of social engineering. It's really important that your colleagues, yourself, are aware of what a phishing email is. It's almost cliche to say it these days, but if you're not expecting an email, if you're not sure what an attachment is, if you're not sure about a link, just don't touch it. And that's the best form of defense when it comes to phishing. Inevitably, people will be caught, and there's some reasonably sophisticated phishing emails going around now that are designed to steal your multi-factor authentication token. So that's about MFA fatigue almost. If you're used to having a mobile phone with the number, someone just keeps requesting it until you say yes. So there's some interesting attack types there. Vulnerable systems. So this is very much, I've got a server or a piece of equipment that is exposed to the internet that hasn't been updated. As a consequence of that, it's perhaps no longer supported by the vendor, and perhaps it's got some security vulnerabilities. If you've got vulnerable systems in your organization, it's really important that you address that, you patch those, or you remove the access from the internet. That's a really important attack vector. Social engineering is about understanding people. We will do our research on individuals. One of the classics at the moment is if you are on LinkedIn and you change your job, that data can be scraped from LinkedIn, and we might use that data to target individuals. And it's not just emails. We might send them WhatsApp messages. We might send just normal SMS messages. And what we're trying to do there is just put a little bit of urgency. Hi, it's Mike. I'm your MD. Welcome. I appreciate it's your first day, but I need you to buy some Amazon gift cards really quickly. That type of pressure often is successful with young people new to jobs. So making sure that they're trained immediately when they join an organization is important. Ransomware and insiders we spoke about. I'll come on to that a little bit more later, but the DDoS is denial of service. So I'm looking at your website, I'm looking at your infrastructure, and I'm going to send lots and lots of traffic to it to slow that infrastructure down. I've seen some really interesting, even last week, some the way to protect against denial of service is quite evolved and reasonably straightforward. You apply a firewall or a web application firewall, but there's still organizations that haven't done that, and we're still seeing organizations be having their websites slowed or attacked because they haven't got that right protection in place, even last week. So denial of service is a real simple form of attack, but we're seeing a lot more than we should be seeing in that area. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a couple of case studies now. So this is a large IT provider. So if you think a regional IT supplier, lots of local customers, 100 staff members, the majority of them local, so a reasonably good job creation in that area, really well known in that particular marketplace. Got about 400 customers, of which 100 were public sector. And 25 were considered to be critical national infrastructure in terms of they were in the defence or government or organisations that we really shouldn't be exposing. So that was the type of customers that they have. They called me when they had the successful deployment of ransomware. So the call that I got was basically our file storage system has been encrypted. All of our backups have also been encrypted. And normally my first question is, what security tools do you have in place? And they said, well, we've got lots of security tools, but they didn't work as planned. So that was what was in front of me when I started working with this individual company. The biggest concern we had there was that there was no path to recovery. So their entire file storage was gone. And because their backups had also been encrypted, we didn't really have a workaround for that. That data was gone. It had been exfiltrated, and we couldn't do anything about it. So that's a really difficult situation to be in. Luckily, they had just migrated their HR and finance tools, so they had at least 6 months of that type of data, but everything else was gone. In addition to that, if you put yourself in your own organizations, if you haven't got access to your file storage, what could you do or what couldn't you do? That's the type of situation they had. Because of the types of customers they had a very, very nervous regulatory position. So they had the National Crime Agency very, very interested in what was going on, and they had the National Cyber Security Centre interested in what was going on. Not necessarily to support this particular organisation, it was to do with the amount of public sector customers that they worked with. And I remember being on one of the calls where the managing director of this particular organisation made a plea to the NCSC about, well, what can you do to help me? And the NCSC very pointedly pointed out that their obligation was to the public sector organisations. And I thought that was a really interesting sort of way of discussing the problem that was that had happened there. In addition to that, so if you think NCA, National NCSC, they want meetings, they want regular meetings, they want regular updates. But also among those 400 customers are some very big and well-known organizations. Each of those customers want to have updates, and they want to have updates on a regular basis. As well as that, we had staff members concerned about the loss of their data. And interestingly, we had a local competitor who had found out about this that was targeting those customers and letting everyone know what had happened. So really, really difficult situation for all involved. If we look at the attack chain of that particular attack, what we had was a vulnerable system. So it was internet facing. It shouldn't have been there because it had been previously decommissioned, but it was still available. It was still internet facing. It still had data on it. So that was the first issue that they had. They had reasonably expensive, well-known anti-malware tool that was set to alert. So the alert came in on a Saturday. No one worked on a Saturday, so no one saw that alert till Monday morning. But this tool had the capability to auto-contain. It wasn't configured to do that. So one of the very sort of good features of a tool that they should have been using, they weren't using. In addition to that, we had no multi-factor in place. So multi-factor authentication is when it's not just your password, it's also something that you know as well. So it's two factors to your login, not just the one. So they had none of that in place, and we were also able to identify via the dark web that they had hundreds of work-related emails that had been compromised in the past. So where basically they've been part of a database breach of some sort. So that was also very worrying. And then the biggest issue here, they had no path to recovery. So whilst they had backups, and they used a very well-known provider for their backups, in fact, probably the market leader in that space, they hadn't air-gapped it. So when an attacker is successful in entering an organization, if you think about their motivation, if they encrypt everyone's files, but there's backup in place, their leverage is disappeared. So if they can see the backups, they will also encrypt those. And what happened here, they actually encrypted the backups first, which is a typical of that type of attack. And then once they've encrypted the backups, they'll come back in and do it into the main business. And because it was the weekend, their login and monitoring and alerting tool didn't work. They had basically 48 hours to make this happen. So yeah, really difficult situation, that one. The second company, a little bit bigger, 70 million turnover, 500 staff members, offices throughout the world, and lots of merger and acquisition activity. So lots of growth happening over a short period of time. These guys had enterprise clients, again, highly recognizable, and as a consequence of that, very demanding. And they had customers that effectively relied on this organization to provide services. So if you think about the type of system that is fundamental to the operation of an organization, this is what this company provided. And interestingly, for this one, the attack was 3 days before Christmas. That was quite challenging because I was on duty for this one. But if you think about an attack 3 days before Christmas, there isn't a lot of resource available to support the recovery. So that was a really interesting situation where we knew there was an incident, but we didn't have enough bodies to support that response. So that was an interesting challenge. What we had here was a successful deployment of ransomware to the file storage system. We had no backups. So whilst the first organization had backups that got encrypted because they weren't air-gapped, this organization had no backups, and they had security tools that didn't work as planned. So that was a significant situation that left them with no path to recovery. So they lost their finance system, they lost their customer relationship management system. So that was everything that they had related to customers. And again, because it was Christmas, we had no staff available. Typically, when you have an incident like this, you schedule calls. So you work out what's happened, you work out the impact, what systems, what we can do about it. Can we contain it? Can we slow it down, etc.? And you schedule calls. And we had calls every 2 hours, 24 hours a day, all the way through the Christmas period into the new year. So it's a very challenging situation. But we also had an extremely nervous customer base who had very senior people knocking on our door, demanding what was happening. We want to know what happened, what you've done about it. Are we at risk? Not unreasonable requests. And to couple with that, there was a pretty inexperienced senior management team who were unable to communicate. So they rather than to talk to those customers, they avoided them. And of course, when that happens, people think you're hiding things. So there's a lack of engagement, lack of understanding of the impact. So particularly challenging situation, that one. Um, the way they got in was through a phishing email. And again, think about the last attack, this sort of decommissioned unit. This individual worked in one of their South American offices. Their device hadn't been decommissioned. It got compromised. And lucky for the attackers, he was a super admin, and this particular individual kept all of his passwords stored in a non-protected Excel file. So the attackers couldn't have got more lucky. So that's what they got. They got the keys to the kingdom, and as a consequence, they were quickly able to move around the organization. In addition to that, we had vulnerable systems. The organization knew there were vulnerable systems. They got told there were vulnerable systems on a regular basis. But like all of us, if you're told the same thing on a daily basis, you tend to ignore it after a while. So some of the alerts were missed because they just thought they were normal alerts that they'd sort of seen every day. They had a very well-known managed detect response tool. They're spending £500,000 a year to have this tool, so it's one of the market leaders. Again, it wasn't configured to auto-contain. The actual deployment of ransomware took 9 seconds, and it moved laterally really quickly after that. If the auto-contain had been configured, it would have stopped it, and it would have stopped it in its tracks, and it wouldn't have been able to laterally move. So that significant investment in tooling hadn't worked. And what's frustrating from my perspective is that we really should test these things and make sure that they work. So that was a difficult one. We had limited multi-factor authentication in place. And more worryingly, we had password reuse. So password reuse is when, as individuals, we're inherently lazy. We want a simple life. So therefore, one of the ways we can make our life easier is using the same password for all of our systems. That's really bad in an enterprise world when you've got multiple systems and you have the same password, because if the bad guy can get into one of those systems, they can laterally move without too much resistance, particularly if multi-factor authentication isn't in place. So we had a perfect storm with that one, and there were no backups in place. So that took about, I would say, 9 months to recover from. But the real impact of a security event is that reputational impact. It really does impact an organization. You're having to pay overtime, third parties, you're having to buy new software, new services. All of your staff are exhausted. They're probably stopped working on client work and are now working on the response and the recovery. Your senior management team are completely distracted because they're being pulled onto calls with stakeholders, with partners, with customers and suppliers. All of your customers and your prospective customers now want you to answer more security questions. So the compliance regime is heightened. So rather than trust, they're now validating that with questionnaires, and they want to see your certificates. So all of that sort of trust drops. It leads to increased overheads. It leads to lower sales cycles. It has a real impact in driving and accelerating a business. And it takes a lot of time to get over that. And that doesn't take into account the individual, people that potentially walk off the pitch because they're exhausted or because they feel that they're to blame. They're not getting enough support. So it's a very challenging situation. And I appreciate where we are with time. So I'm just going to talk about some of the common things that I see almost daily on this. So I really believe that hackers are opportunistic. I think that, like criminals, they don't necessarily set out to start their day to create a crime or break into something. But if they see an opportunity, they will. So if you leave your car door unlocked, they see it, they will open it. If you leave your window open, you're giving them a little bit of encouragement to do so. And I think it's the same for businesses as well. So if we're leaving vulnerable systems exposed to the internet, and hackers find them, which they tend to do because they're scanning often, I think we create a problem for ourselves. So we really need to think about what opportunities we're giving hackers. In our industry, we have a certification called Cyber Essentials Plus. It really is the basics for protecting against cyber events and attacks. But what we've seen is that if you've got Cyber Essentials in place, you're 92% less likely to make a cyber insurance claim. That's uh, amazing from my perspective, because whilst it is a simple set of controls, it does a lot to protect you. It's the basics, it's the table stakes. So if you don't have cyber essentials, you're more likely to claim on cyber insurance. So it's a really interesting one that if I'm talking, and both of the companies that I referred to didn't have cyber essentials. So I think that's food for thought in terms of the types of events that we're seeing, and the correlation to whether they've got cyber essentials or not. Uh, Weak access control. So what I'm talking about here is complex passwords, reusing passwords, making sure multi-factor authentication is in place. Backup and recovery. It's really, really important that you have backups. I can't emphasize the importance of that. And it amazes me, and it shouldn't do, but every day I speak to companies that don't have backups in place. So that's really critical if you want to recover from a cyber incident. The second consideration there is making sure that those backups are not connected to your main system. So there's an air-gapped element to it. So perhaps they're off-site, perhaps they're in the cloud with different connections. So really important. If your backups are connected to your main systems, the bad guys can get to them, and they're not going to serve the purpose for which they were intended. Um, and then the second part of the backup protocols is test it. Make sure that if your IT company says, yep, we've got backups, we do that every 15 minutes, you're in a safe place. That's great to hear. But occasionally, maybe for half a day a year, test that. What happens if we need to recover? How quickly can we recover? What resource do we need? Do we need a degree in rocket science, or are we able to do this ourselves? So test it, make sure that it works. And then make sure that patching is routine. Make sure that if you understand what assets you've got in your organization, make sure that they're patched. Make sure that you understand how those patches are deployed. So if I break that down, those are the typical themes that I see. If I break that down to recommendations, understand your attack surface. So for a small business, it's really easy. We've got stuff in the cloud, we've got some laptops, we've got some mobile devices. That's really easy. But for larger enterprises, that can be challenging. Training and awareness for all staff. If you don't train your staff, how can you expect them to protect your assets and your IT and your confidential information? So it's really important that you do that. Implement multi-factor authentication, make sure we've got complex passwords. I recommend three random words, a lot better than trying to create really difficult to remember passwords. And definitely do not reuse passwords. That's really important. Lots of the attacks we see reuse of passwords or recycled passwords. So summer 123. Now I'm in autumn 123. Those sorts of passwords are really easy to guess, and we can normally breach those within seconds rather than hours. Um, I think just generally, I'm going to sort of leave that and head towards the questions. But if I think of like the final thoughts, I like people to be security troublemakers. I want them to ask questions. I want them to question their business. Why haven't we been trained on cybersecurity? Do we do phishing emails? Do we know what we're protecting? How often do we test our systems? How often do we recover? I think it has to be led by senior management, but also if we're working in a business, it's in all of our interests that that business is secured. So I've left some questions here that you can read and maybe go back to your organizations and just use to bring yourself up to speed and awareness. And that was a quick run through. I think I've left 5 minutes, so I'll hand back over to Sarah in case there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Mike, and that was incredibly comprehensive. Thank you very much. I've been scribbling away as well. when I go back upstairs in the office just to check a few things with our IT department. But that was brilliant. Thank you all very much. There are no questions at the moment. I think that was so comprehensive that you may have answered any questions that people had during the presentation. But as I said, we have recorded it. And we'll send the recording link out later on this afternoon, so everyone can refresh themselves on the fantastic information that Mike's given out today. But those are Mike's details on the screen there, so quick QR code there to there's a great tabletop exercise. That's a great idea, Mike. I shall do that too. And yet no question in, so it just with a few seconds to go until we end. Oh no, we have a question. Hold on. What is so a quick what is Cyber Essentials? So a quick run through on that, Mike, if you could. I know you.
Yeah, of course. That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. Cyber Essentials is a security framework created by the National Cyber Security Centre. Their vision is that all businesses should be at this basic level of cyber hygiene. So what it includes is two stages to it. There's the self-assessment questionnaire, and then there's the audited version, which is Cyber Essentials Plus. The controls that it looks at are very basic in principle, but very important in terms of that sort of defense in depth. It covers, do you have firewalls? Hope so. Do you have a form of anti-malware protection in your devices? Absolutely. Do you understand your perimeter and the number of assets that you've got? Are they updated? Have you got a patch regime? Have you got an auto update regime? It captures multi-factor authentication, complex passwords, and it captures how you deal with user accounts and admin accounts. Admin accounts we're particularly concerned about because if they are breached, as per the case study 2, it really is the keys to the kingdom. So how you protect the privileged users, the admin users, is important. So those are that's what Cyber Essentials asks you to be good at. For most organizations, that is table stakes. So if you've not had a look at Cyber Essentials, it's really worth having a look at. And maybe we can put a quick link on because it's the certification body that looks after this is a company called IASME.
Okay.
Information Assurance for Small Medium Enterprise, I think it stands for. But if you look at their website, iasme.co.uk, you'll see all of the information on Cyber Essentials. But yeah, absolutely have a look at that one.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Mike. That's been really helpful. And we can pop that link out with the recording later on as well, if anyone didn't grab that. Lovely. Well, that just remains me to say another great thank you to Mike for hosting so wonderfully today. Thank you for all your insights. And thank you to everyone for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.